What's up, guys and gals? This is Alex Van Houten with Defining Dad Bod, and I'm in the inner circle. Good to see you guys this wonderful Saturday morning. I'm really excited to hang out with you this morning because I'm talking about attention deficit and hyperactive disorder. And next week, I can't even tell you how excited I am. In 48 hours, we're going to be releasing our show on ADHD and exercise and natural interventions. And I want to do a quick just preview of it here. And then at the end of this video, I'll talk to you a little bit about some of the cool things that are coming in December with Defining Dad Bod. So thank you guys, first of all, for being the inner circle, for supporting the show, for supporting the movement. There's a lot of really cool things happening that I'll rattle on about later. So first, let's talk about ADHD. So if I'd like to know from anybody in the circle, two things. One, do you yourself or anybody in your circle currently carry the diagnosis of ADHD? I'd love to know that. Second, if you don't, or nobody in your community does, I would love to know, have you ever dealt with symptoms of distractibility, irritability, impulsivity, or inattention? So in the course of researching for this particular show and looking through just a ridiculous amount of papers on psychiatric disorders and on the critics of both the pharmaceutical industry and the medical industry around psychiatric disorders, I was really fascinated to see that there's a huge group of people who believe that the ADHD diagnosis, because it's on the rise in diagnosis, especially in the US, I think it's 7% was 3 years ago, and 11% this year. 11% of children between the ages of 4 and 14 years old are currently diagnosed with ADHD. That's 1 in 10. So with that on the rise, there's a large group of people who believe that the ADHD diagnosis is actually a conspiracy by the pharmaceutical industry in order to give kids legal crystal meth. And to an extent, fine. I'm not a huge fan of taking pills when you don't need to either. I get that thought. However, as somebody who personally grew up with inattention, distractibility, impulsivity, and I mean, as an adult, if it wasn't for some of the caffeine that I drank this morning and the run that I went on, then I would likely be going in several different directions all at once as well. And I'm raising a kid who's following in my footsteps. I've worked with children in my 13 years in the fitness industry who have also dealt with these symptoms. I know adults in my life who deal with these symptoms, some of them who are medicated for these symptoms. And so to those people who would be like, ADHD is not real, that's not a real diagnosis, that's just people trying to sell you Adderall and Ritalin. There are some people who really suffer from this stuff. And I think we need to take those symptoms seriously. And I believe that there are positive and powerful ways to deal with those things through exercise, nutrition, and lifestyle, maybe so that you don't need as much medication, or maybe you don't need medication at all. And it's not just me saying I believe this. I have spent a very large amount of time in my life living with this stuff, and I spent a very large amount of time in preparation to release this episode to actually look into deeply the research around attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. So I'm not going to recreate the entire show here. I just want to preview it and get you excited. And then I want to hone in on the exercise piece of it. So first of all, as far as ADHD is concerned, if you take a group of people who have been diagnosed with ADHD and a group of people who haven't, and you put them through several different tests, you have your brain scans, and you have your attention, what do they call them? Attention tasks, and you have your tasks of cognitive flexibility and whatnot. There are actual differences between the structure and function of the brain of an ADHD person and the way that their attention is directed. In fact, one TED Talk that I listened to from a quite successful student at Cambridge University got up and spoke about his experience with ADHD through childhood and even in young adulthood. And he likes to call it attention different hyperactive disorder, because he said, I don't feel that I have a lack of attention deficit hyperactive disorder. I feel that my attention works differently than other people's. Either I'm very distracted, impulsive, and inattentive, or I can hyper focus on the things that I'm extremely interested in and extremely excited about. And he calls it kind of a superpower of his. And however you view that, the point is there is some significant difference between the brain when you have somebody who's complaining of symptoms of inattention, impulsivity, irritability related to those things, and a inability to direct that attention. They call it distractibility. There's a difference between the brain of that person and somebody who says, no, I really don't have that. I mean, sometimes I am distracted and sometimes I'm impulsive, but it doesn't really interfere with my life much. And so when you look at the brain, not only are there a bunch of differences, which I talk about in the show, but the two primary ones that can be affected through exercise, I thought were really fascinating. So the first one can be affected through, there we go, cardiovascular training. So say this word with me. Catecholamine. Catecholamine. Catecholamines are a natural substance released by the body. They're specifically a hormone released by the adrenal glands for the most part, and they're released through high intensity aerobic exercise. Now, catecholamines increase the amount of dopamine and norepinephrine in the brain. And what we found, and I say we, I didn't actually do the studies, I'm talking about the scientific community around ADHD. What we found is that the receptors in the brain that respond to dopamine and norepinephrine are generally less sensitive in those who complain of ADHD symptoms as opposed to people who don't. And what that means is the attention centers of the brain that are supposed to respond to dopamine and norepinephrine generally are much lower functioning in somebody with ADHD or who complains of ADHD symptoms. One of the most powerful ways to affect that from a natural perspective without side effects is through catecholamines. And catecholamines are released in exercise. For males, generally about 80% and above their maximum threshold in aerobic exercise. So let's say I can maximally run at 12 miles an hour. 80% of 12 miles an hour is just over 8.5 miles an hour. So I'm running about 8.5 miles an hour. My body signals the response, hey, release some catecholamines. And what that does in the brain is it releases dopamine and norepinephrine. And so suddenly I become hyper-focused. Suddenly I have the ability without my distractibility and inattention to be hyper-focused on my goal. Some people might call that the runner's high, right? Now, in females, that actually happens at a generally lower threshold, somewhere between 65 and 75% of your maximum effort will release catecholamines for you. But the point of that is one of the powerful things, about exercise is that if you want to focus, if you're somebody who suffers with inattention, impulsivity, distractibility, and you want to focus really heavily on something, you can get some acute relief from those symptoms by engaging in 20 to 30 minutes of high intensity cardiovascular activity. So if I have a big presentation that I'm going to do, or generally I like to say that my most productive hours in my work time is 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. I'm usually working out in my high intensity before 7 a.m. And that focus generally lasts all the way until lunch for me. Now, the effects of cardiovascular exercise on ADHD symptoms don't last very long, 2 to 6 hours tops. However, when somebody who reports suffering from these symptoms engages in this regularly, 3 to 4 times a week, then they report an overall increase in life satisfaction, which means, hey, I feel like I have good control over what I'm doing with my special brain, so to speak. Now, I have a client, I'm not going to name him here. I have a client who is currently being medicated for ADHD symptoms, and he reports that doing his cardiovascular exercise in the morning helps him to hyperfocus at work. And then around 12 p.m., he takes a smaller dose of Adderall than he used to before aerobic exercise, and that generally helps his focus and attention with kids throughout the rest of the day. And so what he's doing, he's actually using cardiovascular exercise to reduce his dependence on the medication that he takes in order to offset these symptoms so that he can focus at work and be the kind of dad that he wants to be and be less irritable throughout the day and that sort of thing. So pretty powerful stuff. The other piece of this from a side effects perspective is the less stimulant that you rely on in order to regulate your ADHD symptoms, the less likely you are to experience those effects. So like dry mouth, stomach problems, difficulty sleeping. These are just some of the mild symptoms that people who are currently taking Adderall or Ritalin complain of with ADHD. And that's a big deal if you can reduce these symptoms through some natural means. And I'm not saying you start running and you can get off your medication, but I'm saying that usually in studies with regard to ADHD, those who implement aerobic exercise can either completely get rid of or decrease the amount of stimulant medication that they're currently taking in order to manage their symptoms, right? That's pretty powerful. I think that's awesome. I go into way more in depth in the actual podcast that's going to be released next week. So if you're interested in that, catch the podcast there. So cardiovascular exercise, extremely important for the release of catecholamines, and that gives some acute relief to the attention, distractibility, impulsivity problems. So next is the resistance training. Now, resistance training, I don't just mean you go to the gym and you get on the bicep curl machine and you just go to town, right? I'm not talking about that specifically. Resistance training, there's just an amazing amount of complexity when it comes to good program design. And if you have questions about that, reach out to me. I'd be happy to help you manage the complexity of intelligent resistance programming so that you don't get injuries and so that you're working toward the fitness skills and abilities that are going to help you reach the goals that you're concerned with, and so that you're not haphazardly trying different machines in the gym and picking up your 5-pound weights and hoping Jane Fonda's going to get you there, right? I don't know. Jane Fonda's a thing. For those of us who grew up in the time I grew up. Maybe it's not for you, but that was a thing. So resistance training, this is more about the long-term changes with regard to ADHD, okay? Say this with me, if I can spell it right. Close enough. Cerebellum. Come on, camera, you can do it. Cerebellum. So the cerebellum is in the back portion of your brain. It's about yay big. If you make a fist, that's about how big your cerebellum is. It's in the back portion of your brain, literally in the back of your mind. When you say, I'm going to put that on the back burner, it's in the back of my mind, you're anatomically talking about the back of your mind. Now, the cerebellum is responsible for motor function, okay? So when you pick something up or you draw or, you talk and you're talking with your hands like I like to, then it's in the back of your mind. Your motor functions are not a conscious thing, right? When you want to pick up your fork to eat breakfast, you don't go, all right, hand, go 6 inches. Okay, open hand, grab fork, right? That's not how it works. It's unconscious. You look at the fork, you see it, something happens in your brain that says, I want that, and you go, rah, and you grab it. Actually, if you think about it, it's very, very strange. I remember as a kid, see, this is ADHD symptoms, rabbit trail. But I remember as a kid that I would sit in class. I used to get really bored in class. In fact, I got in trouble a lot. I graduated valedictorian, but a lot of people don't know that I was always in trouble. They had these little cards you had to flip at the front of the class, and I was always like losing recess time, which, I mean, if you have a kid who can't sit down and focus in your class, why are you taking away his recess time? I feel like if you can't do that, if you can't focus, they should be giving you minutes of exercise. That's my thought. But anyway, it was like, oh, you lost 10 minutes of recess time. I'm like, God, man, dang it. And I was just talking to the cute girl next to me or whatever. Anyway, I would sit in class bored because I had finished my work before everybody else. And I'm like, what do I do now? I've got 20 minutes of twiddling my thumbs. And I'd make paper airplanes and fly them into the trash can. Alex, go flip your card. Ah, dang it. What am I supposed to do? I can't just sit here. So I'm sitting there, and I remember this. I was doodling on my notebook, and I was thinking, like, how do I do that? How do I doodle? I'm not telling my fingers to doodle. So I opened my hand and I was like, close hand, close hand, close hand. And then I just closed my hand. And I'm like, they're two different processes. I don't know what that's about. Well, I didn't know enough neuroscience to know that the conscious process of speaking, for instance, or making decisions is not even the same part of the brain as the part of the brain that controls motor function, which is in the subconscious. It's the cerebellum. What the heck does that have to do with resistance training? Well, if you have symptoms of inattention, impulsivity, distractibility, they do interesting studies on people like that, where they find that the cerebellum is less mature. The neurons in the cerebellum are less mature than fully mature neurons. And what that means is that when you're working subconsciously to control your motor function, those neurons are firing too fast and all the time. Maturity in terms of neurons is not like you grow up and you do more things. It means you grow up and you know what things not to do. I guess that's a good analogy for life. As you get older, you get smarter and smarter about how you spend your time and what's worth your time and attention. I think, what was it, the Serenity Prayer? God help me to accept the things I cannot change, to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference, or something like that. That's maturity in the cerebellum, is the subconscious ability to spend time and energy on the things that matter and to get rid of all the things that don't. And that's what the cerebellum should be doing. Now, in somebody with ADHD, that's not happening as well as in somebody who doesn't have ADHD. And so they'll do these studies with these kids. It's actually some cute videos to watch if you care to look this kind of thing up. But they take this 5-year-old and they say, okay, Zach, I don't think they used his name in the video I watched. I'm just making this particular thing up, not the actual finding, but the kid. Anyway, hey Zach, build this block tower with your right hand. This is your right hand, buddy. Use your right hand to build this block tower. Only your right hand. You can't use your left hand. Okay. So, Zach's building this block tower. And researchers are watching Zach through a video, and they record how many times Zach makes an involuntary movement with his right hand. So the non-ADHD kids, they're building their block tower, and they're like, oh, I'm building a block tower, and maybe they'll itch their face. That's one involuntary movement on the opposite side. The ADHD kids are building their block tower, and they're like pulling it, and they're like stretching, and they're building their block tower, and they can't sit still. Like, they're doing all kinds of stuff. I think people call that fidgeting. And what the researchers found is that they count how many times the ADHD kids made involuntary movements with their opposing side versus the kids who weren't ADHD. And this is a non-medicated thing. This is not medication doing this, all right? They find that ADHD kids were making 3 and 4 times as many involuntary movements with the opposite side as with the other side. Now, are they doing that on purpose? Are they like, well, I'm making this block tower, I'm gonna move right hand, scratch my face, pick my eye? No, it's not voluntary. I can't even voluntarily pick up my fork. It's not an ADHD kid's fault that they're fidgety. It's in the cerebellum. It's like literally firing all the time. They're supposed to be building a block tower with their right hand, and instead their left hand's doing crazy stuff while they're trying to focus on their right hand, right? It's crazy. It's in the subconscious. Why does that relate to the cerebellum? Well, one of the most powerful ways to increase the maturity of the motor neurons of the cerebellum, and this is a long-term thing, okay? It's to learn new skills and to practice those skills regularly. Learn new motor skills. I should correct myself there. Learn new motor skills and practice those regularly. Can you do a handstand? A lot of people can't. If you practice for the next 100 days, your cerebellum will get denser. Do you run well? If you don't, you could go learn how to run and spend the next year of your life getting better at running. And guess what's going to happen? Those neurons in the cerebellum are going to get more and more mature. What does a mature neuron in the cerebellum mean? It means that you can consciously control your movements better, and they're not firing all over the place all the time. So one of the most powerful things, I think anyway, about the exercise findings around ADHD is not only can you get acute, what am I trying to say? Or squirrel. Not only can you get acute relief from these symptoms, but you can also get long-term relief from these symptoms through the regular practice of resistance training. Now, for many people, that means going to the gym and lifting weights. For other people, it might be taking up a hobby that has some complex skills involved. One of my favorite games of all time is DDR, Dance Dance Revolution. It's a square mat in the floor with 4 arrows. There's some versions that go angled, and I have no idea what to do with it. can't keep up. My mind's like, what's with those arrows? The diagonal stuff. I think that's like a salsa version or something. Anyway, forward, backward, left, and right, and the arrows scroll on the screen, and you have to step on the arrow at the right time. And it's set to music. It's a really engaging game. If you suck at it, it's very frustrating. You're on like the easy version. It's like right arrow, and you're like, oh, that's my left foot. Come on, man. But after some practice, you can get really involved in this thing, and you can look up videos on YouTube. Maybe I'll demonstrate for you sometime live. But yeah, people who are really good at this, it's like they're in some other world or some other zone, and they're so focused and they're doing this great. But to learn that skill takes a lot of energy and time from the cerebellum and matures those motor neurons. So I guess what I'm saying to you is, if I didn't lift weights like 3 to 4 times a week, and if I didn't go do things like go to the trampoline park with my kid and do some complex stuff that requires a little more maturity for my motor neurons, I'd have an even harder time focusing on talking to you right now than than I already do. I'd follow even more rabbit trails. We wouldn't get anywhere in 20 minutes, probably. So this is powerful. I hope that you're looking forward to this show. I'm really looking forward to releasing it. I worked very hard on it. I want to say somewhere around 100 hours of research in the last month or two went into this research and talking to people and reading these papers and trying to put it in terms that you might find interesting, because God, some of those like paragraphs are just so hard to muddle through. There's like seven words, and one of them normal people use. They're like the intracerebellar function of the hyperplasma, whatever. Anyway, after all of that time, I put a lot of effort and energy into making sure that this podcast, one, spoke to the plight of people who are currently wrestling with impulsivity, inattention, distractibility, and there's another word in there, hyperactivity. There we go. And even more so to our kids who are wrestling with that in a school system and in a society that oftentimes just wants them to sit down, shut up, and pay attention, which is very, very hard. It's very hard for a regular kid. It's even harder for a kid whose brain's a little special, and you tell them to build a block tower and their other arm's going crazy. Why? Because that's what they do. It's called fidgeting, and their cerebellum doesn't know how not to yet. In a time and place where that's a big deal, I put a lot of time and energy into speaking to this. And secondly, I don't buy the idea that this is some sort of conspiracy by the pharmaceutical companies to sell our kids crystal meth through a messed up insurance system. What I do believe is that there are some people, for whatever reason, genetics, premature birth, mom smoked and drank while she was pregnant, maybe they didn't get to play with dad enough, maybe they have some kind of weird candida overgrowth. I talk about these possible genesis of the ADHD symptoms, by the way, in the show. Whatever the reason is that 11% of our children are currently diagnosed with this, I think that there are powerful ways that we can go about helping them mature their minds, helping us mature our minds through exercise. And then I also talk about nutrition and lifestyle changes that you can make in order to better manage these symptoms. Things like L-theanine, things like it was a really powerful finding that when you put third grade ADHD boys in martial arts 2 days a week for 1 hour each time, their grades go up. They found that in the research. Like it seems completely unrelated. Wow, you do this, and then a school system in Texas tripled their recess time and then climbed to the top of the list in Texas on test results. No other changes, no demographic changes, no changes in their curriculum. They just gave the kids more recess and a little less time sitting on their butts in the classroom, and all of a sudden grades went up. Like, what is that? What is with that? And I think we all need to be on the same page about some of the powerful ways that we can treat these ADHD symptoms through normal, good exercise, nutrition, and lifestyle change that arguably all of us should probably be making to focus our minds a little better and turn this thing into a superpower. So I hope you're excited. I'm very excited. I hope that you'll share this with somebody in your life who either is currently diagnosed with ADHD or is struggling with these symptoms, and you know they're struggling with these symptoms, or maybe they have kids that are struggling with these symptoms, and I hope it helps them so much, because that's what we're doing here at Defining Dad Bod, and that's what you in the inner circle are supporting, is a movement working to create a legacy of health and fitness for our kids. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you working through my rabbit trails to understand the power of cardiovascular exercise on the catecholamines that will help us focus, and resistance exercise in maturing the cerebellum, so that we have long-term benefits of focus, less distractibility, more attention in those of us who wrestle with these symptoms regularly. Guys, thank you so much. Thank you for your support of the Defining Dad Bod movement. We're growing stronger, faster than ever. It's very powerful and awesome, and I couldn't do it without you. So I'm going to keep doing this. You keep doing what you do. And until next time, kick butt, take names.